You're listening to The Purple Mystic, a podcast for the modern witch, with your host, Natalie Sedgwick. So today I am sitting down with Deborah Blake, author and tarot creator. So I am very excited to have you on the podcast because I got lots of stuff I want to talk about. I love your work. I understand that you have 6 fiction lines that you have published with at least 3 to 4 books each. So for us little bookworms, that's going to be a good one. And then you have over 30 nonfiction books that you have written, including publications with Llewellyn. So, Ms. Blake, I would like to ask you how you got started on your path.
All right. On my path, not as an author, but as a witch.
Both.
Yeah. Okay. So as a witch, I was in my, mid to late 30s. I was sort of a late bloomer, and I've been looking for something. I mean, I'm Jewish, and once you're Jewish. But the religion, I love the heritage. The religion didn't cut it for me. Whole stern father figure, women sit in the corner, yada, yada, yada. And I went to the Unitarians for a while, and they were lovely, but they were somehow lacking in a spiritual thing I was looking for. And then I studied Buddhism and Taoism, and that was really close, but it was still missing something. And I had a friend who kept saying, you should come to this thing I do at my house. I think you'd like it. And I'm not a people person. I mean, I like people 1 or 2 at a time. I'm not a crowd of people that I don't know kind of person, which is sort of ironic considering now I go to conventions and conferences and talk to large crowds of people that I don't know, but that's different. So, she finally said one Samhain, she said, we're just having a few people over. We're going to have a feast, and then we're going to go into the park next to my house and do a ritual. Come see. And I said, okay, only a few people. Her idea of only a few people was like 30 people in a small apartment. I walked in, and all these people I didn't know were hugging me and saying weird things like "merry meet." And I'm like, what the heck is that? And I thought, what have I gotten myself into? But the food was good and everybody seemed nice. And then we went outside into the park next to her house after dark. And at the end of October is pretty early. And they cast the circle, and I reached out as I had been reaching out over the years. But this time somebody reached back. And there were God and Goddess. And basically they said, well, it took you long enough. And it was just like, okay, then. But that was the beginning, she had a group that she called a study group, and they met once a week. And, the closest, we would meet like on a Thursday, whichever holiday or full moon or new moon or whatever was closest to that was what we'd celebrate. And in the meanwhile, we just studied things and learned. She was from a Wiccan tradition. So my earlier teachings were mostly sort of Wiccan slanted. Although she didn't have a high priest, we had a couple of guys in the group who would take that position when we did rituals. So she was sort of, Wiccan, but not strictly,
like Gardner.
Right. We didn't do like levels or, first degree or whatever. And when I had been with her group for about 5 years, I guess, I went to her and I said, okay, I think I'm ready to, do the next step. I think I'm ready to study to be a high priestess. And so she sent me a year and a day's worth of the extra study, had me leading rituals, rituals that we did at the UU church, which had like 50 people besides our group come to them. And then after the year and a day, nothing really happened. And there was a blow up. You know how things happen with groups. She got a boyfriend. Yes. She had a boyfriend who didn't like me is what happened. And, she basically said, well, you can come to every other ritual and he'll come to every other ritual. And I went, nope, don't think so.
That's not community.
Yeah, that's not the way this works. Even I know that. And so then I was a solitary for about 9 months while I sort of pondered. I mean, I did dedication with a couple of friends, and then I waited. And when it was time, I started Blue Moon Circle, which is my own group, originally with two women. So there were three of us. And the reason we're called Blue Moon Circle is because if one person couldn't come, we usually just canceled. So we only met once in a blue
No,
moon.
I love that. Yeah, it's
And
similar with me. Was looking for something and really couldn't. I was raised Church Christ. That didn't
right,
ever jive with me well, but I was told that that was the right path and the only path. So
right.
got that
Only path,
fear.
only path.
Yes, and then I met my husband, who is a devout Catholic. Well, he was a devout. His mother was a devout Catholic. Let me
Ah,
refine that. He was a practicing Catholic at the time, but semi-practicing, and I liked the ritual and the feel of it. I mean, when I walked into a Catholic mass, I felt like people were actually worshiping,
right.
not just putting a face up. And I really was drawn to that. But it was that stylized ritual that brought me, and even then
Uh-huh.
that were missing. I mean, there were so many atrocities going on within the church. And, I always had abilities. And when I talked to a priest about it, he told me that's not of God. Well, how can it
Right.
be of God if God creates all things, right?
Yeah.
And I really felt like, the other thing that drew me to Catholicism was the devotion to Mary, because I always felt it was very lopsided, you
Right.
towards masculinity. And I'm like, but if we're all made in God's image, then, I was also made in God's image. So how am I below somehow? So that
Yeah,
bothered
that's
me.
it's an issue.
Yeah, it was definitely an issue. And Wicca didn't really suit me because I didn't like the dogma.
Right.
And I'm not a big believer in the rule of three. I am a follower of physics. So, you drop a rock in a pond and it's gonna ripple out.
Right.
Some of that's gonna come back to you, but it's usually attenuated, not three times stronger or
Right. I usually sort of go by the law of returns, which is what you put out, in
back.
some way, shape, or manner will eventually come back to you. But, if you look at
Exactly.
the world, you can see that that rule has some flexibility.
Mhm.
And, you know, I still assume that whatever I put out is going to come back and I behave
Absolutely.
accordingly. But I also I'm a generally, do unto others as they would do unto you would have them do unto you person. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to be mean. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to break rules.
Same.
And yes, you can see a lot of people doing that and getting away with it. And sooner or later, I truly believe it will come back to bite them.
It,
Will it
it
come back to
does.
bite them in time to save us? Well, there's a whole.
Well, there's that, yeah, but no, and I totally agree. And it didn't really follow. And I don't gel well with groups of people
Me,
typically.
me either, except apparently with pagans. it is very ironic that I am a very solitary person. I live by myself, if you can call living with five cats by yourself.
I don't think
A lot
so.
of friends, but I'm like, okay, here's 3 hours for you, then I have to go hide. Most of my activities
Just 1 second. We've got going on here.
things happen.
Sorry about that little interruption. Life, it happens. So,
It does. Usually when you least expect it.
yes, I was not expecting that. I talked to them last week about this. So, law of returns. So, following the law
Right.
of returns and what you put out,
Right.
we're going to get back.
Well, and I always figure it's a good idea to err on the side of caution when you're doing something powerful. But if you've read my witchcraft books, you'll see that I always tell people, there is no one right way in witchcraft. As far as I'm concerned, as long as you are not hurting yourself or hurting anyone else, whatever feels right to you, that's that you do you. I
Right.
mean, my books are guidance, they're suggestions, they're, here's a bunch of spells, try using
This is
these. Here's,
what
my
works for me.
philosophy,
Yeah.
but yeah, they are not law.
And
I
I think
am,
it's important too to understand that, there's always going to be some sort of unexpected or unintended effect from whatever you do. And that goes for anything in life, not just magical practice, but anything that you do. So, like, if you think about, okay, say you are casting to get some money that you need, right? Well, depending on what source that comes from, it might mean that somebody else doesn't get something. If you are, I'm one of those people that you want to use whatever tools are at your disposal. So say you're up for a promotion at your job, right? But somebody else that's equally matched to you is up for your promotion, and you cast a spell to give you that edge, right? You're casting a spell to give you an edge, which you would do.
Right.
You'd be giving yourself an edge if you jimmy up your resume, if you took an extra class that you put on
Mhm.
your,
You
for
use the
whatever.
tool you have.
Exactly. Now, it could mean that that person doesn't get that job. So if that person does not get that job, you don't know how that's going to affect their family. But that's true with anything that you do.
Right. I
So,
mean, truthfully, if you get any job over somebody else, they, maybe they really needed it. On the other hand, did you really need it? You maybe did. So,
right.
yeah, my general approach to witchcraft is that I try and only cast spells that are going to affect me and nobody else. Of course, as you said, you don't always know unless I have permission. Like, say, somebody says, yes, please do a healing spell for me. That's,
Right.
that's a different thing because I've gotten their permission ahead of time. I would not do a healing spell for someone whose permission I did not have, because there are, first of all, people who are not witches may be very uncomfortable to know that you did. I mean, would we want, a Catholic priest praying for us? Maybe. Depends on the Catholic priest and his intentions and, all of that. But I mean, when things are like, when one of my cats is horribly sick and I go on Facebook and post about it, and people say, I'm going to pray, and I'm like, you go for it. It's just like, send, it's all the same thing as long as the intention is good. But
I
yeah, I do
agree.
try and avoid anything, like with the prosperity something. I wouldn't necessarily say, please give me this job. I would say, please give me, something that will bring in extra money, or please give me the best possible job under the best possible circumstances. And if it happens to be that job that somebody else is going after, I've put it out there. I am not saying, smote this person so I can have the job.
Right.
So,
No. And I
uh,
would suggest that anybody do that.
no, I think that's a bad idea.
Allow my skills to shine. But again, if you get the job and the other person doesn't,
Right.
you
Well,
have to
and
be mindful of.
certainly, like, if you're going to go in for an interview and you want confidence for the interview, or you want to be as eloquent as possible given your abilities, those things absolutely legit. I mean, I have no problem with that. All that's doing is making your light shine the best it can.
Right.
And sometimes the confidence thing is tricky. Having a little bit of magic to back that up is absolutely, I mean, my newest book, Llewellyn's Little Book of Spellcraft. I talk a lot about, how to use spells, how not to use spells, when it's a good idea, when it's not a good idea. I call them, the witch's power tool. And what I say is, sometimes, when you're working on a project, you need a power tool. Sometimes you just need a screwdriver,
Right.
So one of the things you have to decide when you set out to do a spell is, do you even need a spell? Or are there plenty of mundane approaches that you can use?
Work really
And
well.
then, I talk about how to create your own spells, but there's also a whole bunch of, spells in there that you can use if you don't feel like creating your own spells. And my first spell book, which was my fourth Llewellyn book, the Everday Witch A to Z spell book. That's the one with the purple cover, which is sort of ironic because actually the spellcraft book has a purple cover too. I didn't even think about that. Maybe purple's my spell color. I don't know.
It
But
is
that one
the
has,
highest spiritual color.
I love it. Yeah. So that book has unusual spells. This one has sort of the traditional, prosperity, protection, healing. That one, I on purpose had a whole bunch of spells that you might not find in a typical spell book. My favorite being the jerk avoidance spell, because who couldn't use that?
You know,
But there were spells for like finding a new house, but spells for helping you at work, all sorts of things. Um,
I
you
did
know,
one for invisibility, and my husband's like, "You don't honestly think you're invisible, do you?" And I said, "See, there's your fallacy. You don't understand what I'm doing. What I'm actually doing is just blurring the energy around me so
right.
you don't notice me as much, and it works very effectively."
Well, hey, either that or you wait until you're a woman of a certain age and then you just naturally become invisible anyway. You don't
People
even have
don't
to
pay any
cast a
attention to anything I
spell.
say. Oh,
You
amen
can be
to that.
standing in front of a counter waiting for somebody to wait on you, and there's two guys there, and yep, you're invisible. There is no, but they can't see you, they can't hear your mouth. It's just no, it's a thing. Completely superfluous, that
But I think
spell.
I've been at that age for a while.
Yeah, well, me too. I'm 64, so yeah, I've been invisible for some years, unless I'm,
Next month. So
at a
yeah, I get
convention
you this
waiting my.
month. Oh my gosh, it's already July. I'll be 51 this
I know. I don't know how it's July. I don't understand how that happened. Yeah, this year is a little insane. I mean,
Yeah,
even
this
for
year's
lately,
really quick.
really ever since the pandemic, I don't know what time it is. Don't know what day it is. I don't know what month it is. But yeah, it's a little crazy. And I have calendars and I have reminders. Doesn't matter. I still don't know.
Same, doesn't matter.
I
I
am
write things
unrooted
down and
in
I still forget
space.
them.
So the answer to the question about how I got started with the writing is slightly different, obviously. That I had always wanted to write. I mostly wanted to write fiction. I never thought about writing nonfiction, and I've been writing since I was a teenager, but I didn't have a lot of confidence, and so I'd send something out and it'd get rejected. I wouldn't do anything for 2 years, and
Right.
and I hit adulthood, and I would start writing a novel, but I never finished any. I probably had like 20 started novels,
Mhm.
and a year after I had been, running Blue Moon Circle, running it, ha ha ha, leading Blue Moon Circle the best I could. We sort of celebrated our first anniversary, and I thought, gee, I wish that I had had a book that had been handed to me on day one of starting a new group that told me how to do that first year.
Yeah.
That had, new moon, full moon, and holiday rituals, that had some hints for ritual etiquette, that had, things to avoid. And I looked and I couldn't find that book. So I wrote it. And what I actually did was I wrote, I think it was probably the first 50 pages and an outline and all that stuff, whatever it was that the Llewellyn website said that they wanted. And I sent it in, and, then went back to doing housework because their website said it might take, 6 months before you hear an answer because publishing works very slowly. And 2 months later, I got an email from Alicia Gallo, who has been my editor ever since and who I love and adore, that said, "We really like this. I'd like to read the rest of it." There was no rest of it yet
Oh,
because I thought I had 6 months.
right.
So I literally dropped everything. And in 5 weeks, I wrote the rest of the book. And my mother, who was a librarian and then a library director, and then, and who was also a writer, edited it for me. So it was all polished and beautiful. And I'm a former English teacher, so I'm pretty good at the technical stuff anyway. And I sent it in. And then I waited the 6 months because it turned out that Alicia had just started the job at the same time I sent in. We were basically babies together in publishing.
I got you.
And she had what she called an eerily empty desk, which had never happened since. I mean, it's just, and they did eventually say, yes, we would like to buy this. And so, the book came out 2 years later. But after that, I said, well, my excuse for not working on a novel is that I never finished anything. But look, I finished something and I sold it. I don't have that excuse anymore. So then I got serious about writing the fiction again. And in theory, that nonfiction book was a one-off. I had no intention to have a career, which it turns out I do. As you said, I have the book that I'm working on for Llewellyn now is the 18th nonfiction book, all but one of them from for Llewellyn. I did one for who did I do that for? St. Martin's Press. And of course, there's a tarot deck and two oracle decks, and I'm now working on another tarot deck with my same illustrator, Elizabeth Alba. And
How did you come across your illustrator? Because I have a
oh
book
my
I
God,
wrote.
isn't she wonderful?
It's wonderful.
I,
But I have a book I wrote and I sent it in and they loved the manuscript, but because it's a children's book and their children's imprint is very small, they
I,
said find an illustrator and bring it back or find your options
right,
are find a publisher that has a children an illustrator,
right.
or you can find an illustrator and bring it back to us, which is what we hope you will do. It's now going on 2 years and I'm still looking for an illustrator. I had a friend that was going to illustrate it. She was excited about it. She's a gifted artist.
Right.
Back some preliminary sketches and I was like, these are great. And then I didn't hear from her again. And then I noticed she
Yeah.
blocked me. And we're talking, I've been best friends with this girl since fifth grade. So
Wow.
I was like, why did you block me? And she's like, I didn't block you. And I said, all my messages are in green. You blocked me. And she's like, oh, how weird. And then, finally she's just like, I just think this project is too big for me. I don't know that I
Well,
can.
why didn't she just say that to begin
That's
with?
what
Yeah.
I said. So
People, I don't know, people are funny. But
but
anyway, so how did I find Elizabeth?
yeah.
Well, what happened was uh I I ended up being asked by Llewellyn if I wanted to do a tarot deck, which isn't usually the way that works. I had done the Little Book of Cat Magic, and that had sort of a cute, sort of old-fashioned looking cover. And my writing, there's always some humor in it, a little bit of whimsy.
Which is
Um,
like
and so they said, we're looking for a deck that has this sort of feel to it. We love the way you write, bless their hearts. And uh, at that point, my fiction career had started. I think I was working on my maybe second series or the end of the first series, and I was really busy with that. And my initial thought was, "Oh, I don't have time for this," because I was working a day job.
Mhm.
Being owned by cats. I have a house, I have a garden. And then I just thought about it for a couple of days, and I went, "You idiot! You could have your own tarot deck. Say yes. Don't, this is like a once in a lifetime opportunity. What are you thinking? Of course, you're going to say yes." And so when I said yes, Barbara Moore, who's in charge of that department, who's wonderful and has many of her own tarot decks, which are really stunning, and a couple of which I used to sort of inspire me when I was working on my own, because I've been reading tarot professionally for, at this point, probably close to 30 years. At that point, maybe it was 20. Um, and she said, "Do you know anything about the Rider Waite deck?" And I went, "Yeah, that's what literally the only deck I use." And she said, "Well, we want you to use those cards, but they can look like anything you want to look like." And they gave me four names of people that they had, illustrators they'd been sort of keeping an eye on but hadn't used yet. And they said, check these people out. And if any of them appeal to you, get back to us. We'll contact them and ask them if they'd be willing to do a tarot deck. Because as big a project as a tarot deck is for an author, for an artist, it's huge. It's 78 individual paintings, full-size paintings, plus one for the back of the card. So, I mean,
Right.
it's like your
It's a
project.
phenomenal task. Yeah.
So anyway, Elizabeth happened to be the first one that I went and looked at her website. And I loved her. She had some beautiful sort of fairy tale like pictures. I loved her style and just everything about it. Literally did not look at the other three. I went back to Barbara and I said, please, 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 please just get her. I don't care who you have to like kiss, kill, whatever. Just please, I want to do my deck with her. And luckily they contacted her and she wanted to do it. And, that deck actually has been so popular. We knew when we started working on it that we had something special.
It is fun.
Everybody at Llewellyn, there was just an energy to it. The Everyday Witch Tarot, I set out to, as from my books, I like things to be accessible for people. You shouldn't have to work really hard to get things out of what you're reading or your tarot deck.
Right.
And because one of the women in my group said to me, I've been trying to learn tarot for years, I just can't connect to these Rider-Waite cards. So I purposely set out with the Everyday Witch Tarot to make them accessible, to make them comfortable for the modern witch, because the Rider-Waite, which, like I said, I used it for years and I loved it, but it has some very old esoteric symbols that don't resonate with a lot of people these days. I mean, if they do, that's great. But
Well, a lot of people
and
aren't familiar with the Order of the Golden Dawn, which is really where that
right,
came out of. So some of those symbols have been lost over time.
right. Well, and it also has some very Christian feel to it, which for people like me, that was the part that I was not comfortable with, both from my Jewish background and also just from a not mine background. So, yeah, I also wanted to take the scary cards, the Tower, the Devil, Death, the ones that people are always afraid of getting in a reading, and add a positive spin, because I do that when I do tarot readings. I mean, death very rarely means actual death. It has once or twice, but it was never a surprise. It was like, oh, your father's dying? Yes. Well, this says he's going to die pretty soon. Sorry. But it was never like giant accident coming that we aren't expecting.
Wow.
It's often the death of something. The end of one part of your life. I mean, if I had a reading right before I quit my day job, I'm pretty sure I would have gotten the death card, because I mourned for a year. It was, I had been doing it for 23 years. It was my baby. Yeah, it was a death thing, but it wasn't scary. It was what needed to happen. It was just hard. So, yeah, so we put this deck out, and I have gotten more messages and emails from people saying, I've been trying to connect to the tarot for years, and your deck was the one that did it for me, which makes me so happy, because that was what I wanted to do. And then, Elizabeth and I had such a great working relationship. We've actually become friends, because it's been a number of years. And eventually, I mean, she had other projects, I had other projects. Eventually, we did the Everyday Witch Oracle, which was also great. And we just put out our second Oracle deck, which again, we started working on 3 years ago. And that's the Everyday Witch's Familiars Oracle. And it's all animals. There's no peoples in it, no witches. It's witchy, the animals, there's magical things. And it's not all cats. People keep asking me, because we put a lot of cats in the Everyday Witch Tarot. But no, there's a cat, there's a dog, there's also, like lions and owls and fireflies. And then it's 40 cards, and 4 of them are spirit animals, basically. There's the unicorn, dragon, sphinx, and phoenix.
I was saying Phoenix, right? Yeah, because that's a good one.
I love the phoenix, although the dragon, my house is full of cat things and dragon things. I just, I'm all about, in fact, they can't see, but you can see behind me
I was
on
looking
the
at
wall. That is one of the cards from the Everyday Witch Tarot. And that's, a queen sitting on, believe it was Queen of Pentacles, sitting on a dragon as a chair. And that picture is actually me. In the deck, she took one picture and made it my face, which was kind of cool. So, so I'm particularly fond of that one.
I have to tell you, my favorite card in that deck, though, honestly, is the Tower card. And I know
mine too. I love it.
I just love the look on her face, because she's the one that brought that on her.
Yep. And I did that on purpose, because a lot of times, yes, life blows up in your face.
Mhm.
But sometimes it has to in order for you to move on and build something new and make a new start. And so, yes, the picture was, when I talked to Elizabeth about it, because the way we did that deck in the beginning was I wrote the book and I said, this is what I want the pictures to look like. And she would change a few things. She would say, do you mind if I give this witch striped stockings? I'd be like, no, that's cool. Go for it.
Absolutely.
But most of it came from my head, and then she did the artwork. And I said, can you make it look like there's just a chance? You're not sure, but have her wand hidden behind her back with sparks still coming out of it. So you can look at that card and go, did life do this to her, or did she decide on some level or another that, and her cat's like cowering under a bush and going, ah, crap, what mama do? But yeah, I really like that.
That look
That
on her face is just like,
yeah,
yeah, this might have happened, but I'm still in control, which
yep, exactly.
I love that
So
card.
so yeah, and we just started working on a brand new deck, which is also going to be completely different. It's called the Whimsy Woods deck, and it's a tarot deck. And the thing about Elizabeth is she goes through phases where she was painting people, then she wanted to paint animals, and now she's painting these whimsical animals that are sort of like a cross between kind of Wind in the Willows and Walt Disney's Robin Hood. They have clothes, they live in villages, but they're animals, they're not people. And so that's what that deck is going to be. There's going to be like otters and uh the High Priestess is like the village wise woman, and I'm trying to remember what she is. We're just beginning to work on it, but that's again, it's going to be fun. It's going to allow me to let my little sense of humor peek out. And this one, Elizabeth is actually taking point on, which is hard for me because I'm a little bit of a control freak. But
Understood.
it's
Same.
it's good for me. But she's basically, we put in our samples. She did a couple of sample drawings, paintings, and I did, the writing that went with them. And Luell literally agreed on the same day we sent it in. They loved it so much, which is great. It's good for my ego.
Yeah, for real.
But uh, uh,
Rejection
but
is so hard on the ego. So
we basically got together and figured out what all of the cards were going to look like in sort of a general way. But then she's been doing the sketches, and once she hands me a batch of sketches, I do the guidebook to go with them. And I mean, the cards still mean the same things. The Queen of Pentacles is still the Queen of Pentacles,
right.
but you address it a little bit differently depending on what the scene looks like. So yeah, it's a little different, but it's going well. And she has earned that because she's done such a stellar job on all of these other decks. And I knew that whatever she came up with was going to be wonderful. So yeah, so we're having fun playing with that.
And your
But it's
decks, I mean, that Everyday Witch is so popular. And every time I use it for my coffee and cartomancy, I always want to make sure I reference. I try to anyway, because I like people to know what deck I'm using.
right.
But I
Well, and it's
forgot
good to
one
give
time and
credit.
somebody asked me, what deck is that? And I was like, oh, I forgot to mention it. So yeah, it's a great deck.
Yeah, no, it is. The only thing, for the people who are listening, I want to warn that your listeners, it has been pirated all over the place.
Yeah.
It is really easy to get a fake version. Every freaking week I get a letter from somebody saying, "Gee, I bought your deck and it said to scan the QR code on the back to get the guidebook, and the QR code doesn't work. Can you send me the guidebook?" And I'm like, first of all, I don't have a separate guidebook because it comes as a set in the legitimate from Llewellyn. It comes in a nice box with a magnetic closure. It's got a beautiful, like full color book. If you buy it and it's just the cards, It's a knockoff. And if you scan the QR code, you're probably going to get a virus. You're for sure not going to get the book. And I'm not going to get paid. Elizabeth isn't going to get paid. Llewellyn isn't going to get paid.
Work.
And there are so many, I mean, people also, are very sweet and send me links when they find the fake ones.
Yes.
They're everywhere. They're even on Amazon. If you find the deck on Amazon, make sure it says that it is put out by Llewellyn.
Yeah.
But really, the safest way, if you want that deck, go to Llewellyn and get it directly from them. That is the only guarantee you are going to get the real thing. Even in stores, the people who, have new age stores, pagan stores, will buy from what they think is a legitimate source if they don't, say, have an account that gets it directly from Llewellyn, which many do. And you almost always can, get a legitimate one from a store, but not always. Sometimes they have bought a fake.
Smaller. They're usually like playing card size.
Right. There you can tell by them, but and also if you're looking at a deck that normally costs $32 and they're selling it for $8 on Wish or Temu, well, common sense, if it's $8, it's not real and it's going to be a piece of crap. Some of them are missing cards. They definitely do not have the guidebook with my brilliant wisdom in it. So yeah, and they are just starting to pirate the Everday Witch Oracle deck. It's been out long enough now. So if you are going to get a deck, pretty please just go to Llewellyn. And, they run sales 5-6 times a year at least, maybe more than that, with like 25% off, 30% off. So if, you were trying to save money, just wait until they have a sale. I think if you spend it's either $25 or $35, you get free shipping. So yeah, just the books mostly are fine. I mean, the books you will also find pirated occasionally. Usually that's if you find something that says free download.
Oh yeah.
Again, if it says it's free, it is not legitimate, and it probably comes with a lovely virus that you're not going to realize. And again, the people who worked really, really hard to make that book are not going to get any money.
I just want to talk about that for a second, because the very first episode of this podcast that I did was about fake authors, how they're using AI to generate witchcraft books under fake author names that aren't even real people. And the publishing companies are doing this because it's cheaper than paying an author and or illustrator to give them a work.
And Llewellyn does not do that, by the way. I would like to make that clear.
But the tarot decks, I mean, it has become such an epidemic that wonderful tarot creators like Ciro Marchetti, he's no longer producing decks because all of his stuff gets pirated. So something he has spent a lifetime building a business around that he desperately loves and passionately loves, he's not doing anymore. And I've seen a lot of other authors just drop out.
Elizabeth and I get so discouraged about it, because there is nothing. I mean, Llewellyn can send a takedown notice. They can, but it's like playing whack-a-mole. You get rid of it in one place, it shows up in another place. They're very good at making it look like the real thing, which is why I've just sort of given up on trying to tell people how to. I mean, I have a public service announcement that I post periodically, which is a video where I show off what it is actually supposed to look like with the box and with the guidebook, and say, if what you're seeing does not look like this, don't buy it. Exactly. But even so, yeah, I mean, it's easy for people to be fooled. So yeah, if you want a deck, get it directly from whoever put it out, whether it's Llewellyn or someplace else. That is the only way you can be absolutely sure of not getting a fake.
Exactly. Before I knew what Wish was, my cousin, who has over 100 and some odd tarot decks herself, she has a big trunk that she has all of her decks in, that, she knew I'd wanted this one particular deck, and she sent me this link. And so coming from her, I just thought, I'd never heard of Wish. I didn't know what Wish was, never ordered.
Oh yeah, Wish is evil. Never buy anything from Wish. I'm just saying, Wish or Temu. No.
Any of those. And so I was like, oh, I love this deck. I really wanted this deck, and what a great price. And Stupid here thought maybe they had bought too many or they were trying to clear
Right. Well,
stock.
you always think that, it's
So yeah, it was horrible. It was this big. It was clearly playing cards. I ended up just burning the deck because I didn't even want to use it for spellcraft because
right.
what kind of energy is attached to this if it's been pirated? I don't want that affecting my spellcraft because sometimes I like to
Yep.
use arrow images in some of my spells. So what I'll do is I'll take the book and I'll take the page out of the book and I'll use that instead.
Right.
But it was awful. I was like, never doing this again. Never.
Nope. It's a thing.
It's
It's a it is a difficult time to be an author in many, many ways. I mean, it's also a wonderful time to be an author. It really, depends on the day. Um, but it is, publishing in general is really struggling. Print is struggling. And, one of the things that's happened on the fiction side of things, because as you said, I have a bunch of novels as well, is that these companies keep buying each other out. And so when I started writing, there were like the big 20, and they are now down to the big 6.
yeah.
So there are fewer and fewer places for authors to send their books. And if, the editor that you send it to at House A says no, you have fewer options. It's really frustrating. But people think, oh, authors make so much money. What does it matter if I steal from them?
No, you don't make much money.
No.
And it's very hard
Unless
to get a work published.
Right, unless your name is, Nora Roberts, or, if you're huge, and even those people, they work really hard. Don't steal from them.
Right.
But yeah, it is not something you do for the money. It's something you do because you love it.
Passionate about exactly. I want to
So
talk a little bit about some of your fiction books here because I'm curious about the creative process. And I always ask people who create how they go through their creative process. It's very fascinating. I know my process. I mean, for me, like when I sit down, when I was doing my PhD work and I had a paper due, I would sit down the night before the paper was due and I would 1 hour later, 20-page paper, references. My husband's like, how do you do that? He goes, do you like, because I don't write outlines. Don't write outlines. If I write
see, and I do. I am an outliner most of the time.
Well, it's in here. I'm already like making notes. I already kind of have it. The outline is in my head, I guess.
See, I make notes and then they fall out of my head and I can't find them. They're under the couch. I don't know where. The other thing is, once you become a professional author, you have to have an outline to turn into the publisher. Right. They will not just take your word for it that you know where the story is going to go. I mean, unless you're fairly high up on the food chain and are a best-selling author, at that point, they're probably going to go, oh, yeah, we like your general idea. There have been a few books for Llewellyn that I basically got a contract based on the table of contents kind of outline and the introduction and, my explaining how it was going to work. But there are other times when they're like, okay, we want to see like a sample chapter, but they know I can finish the book. They know what my writing is like. When you start out, no, they want a whole lot more for you. And with, the fiction, like once you've sold a series, like when I sold my Baba Yaga series, which was my first series, I had to do a full outline for the first book. The next books in the series, I basically had to do like a synopsis of like 5 pages, but it still had to have the start of the book, the middle of the book, and the end of the book. There was, you could wing it in between if you wanted to. I am an outliner. I outline the nonfiction just because I have a very orderly brain and that makes it easier. Mm-hmm. I outline the fiction in part because I am very linear. I have author friends who can start with a last scene or a middle scene or hop back and forth. And no, that hurts me in my soul.
Well, and that was what I was going to ask you is like, for example, your Baba Yaga series, you have 7 books in that series. So when you started that series, did you know where you were going to end up, or do your characters? Because I have started out something thinking it was going to go one way, and then suddenly some characters not falling into line.
Well, the Baba Yaga series is sort of interesting. It's actually when Berkeley put it out, they considered it to be two series, the Baba Yaga series and then the Broken Riders, which is a spin-off. In my head, it was all one series that was continued.
And there's
And
more
they
books in
the
that
first
series.
right, they did the first five. They did the three Baba Yaga books, the first two of three of the Broken Riders, and then they said, no, we're not going to buy the last one. And so I wrote that and put that out myself because I wanted people to have the rest of the story.
Right. That's kind of
And
important to a
then
reader.
I wrote one more book on the first Baba Yaga, because in the Baba Yaga books, there's actually separate protagonists, separate lead characters for each of the books. They're all to get, all of them are intermixed in all of the books because there's this sort of through storyline. But no, there were some things that happened that I didn't expect. I did not plan the whole series out. The three Baba Yaga books I knew were going to be these three women. Baba Yaga, for those who are not familiar with her, is a very traditional Russian witch mythology. When you start looking at it more deeply, she actually started out as a goddess figure and then sort of got downgraded to this
Woman that lives in a house with chicken legs.
yes, a house in the chicken legs on chicken legs that could move through the forest. And she was, she had like a beaky nose and iron teeth. And the thing that I liked about the Baba Yaga and how I got to write that book was I was talking to my agent, and we had submitted some books places, and they, we hadn't sold them yet. Some of them circled back and sold later. And I said, well, what should I write next? And she said, well, I really liked the books you wrote that had witches in them. That's the Veiled Magic series, which Berkeley did put out later, and which I got the rights back and I just reissued those. And I'm working on reissuing the Baba Yaga books in a larger format, bigger covers, nicer covers. But she said, I like could you do something with witches in it? And we both liked retold fairy tales, but I didn't want to do like Beauty and the Beast because everybody had done Beauty and the Beast and all of those sort of traditional ones. And I thought, well, what's a fairy tale that has a witch in it? That the witch isn't like the evil part of the story. And yes, the Baba Yaga could be, I mean, she had skulls on like sticks around her house, and, she was used to scare small children into eating their peas, but she also would guide a worthy traveler or answer your question if you could do the right things. She wasn't either good or evil. It all depended on how you approached her. And I loved that idea. So I said, okay, if I were going to bring the Baba Yaga into the modern world, because, you'd notice if somebody were, living in a house, on chicken legs.
Yeah.
And they had and one of the interesting things is in many of the stories, they talked about the Baba Yaga and her sisters, who were also called Baba Yaga, because Baba Yaga basically, Baba is a word for grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
It just means old woman, essentially. And so I said, okay, what if it's a job title? And the Baba Yagas are these witches who are responsible for guarding the gateways between our world and the other world, and for keeping the balance of nature, which of course has gotten to be a tougher job. And yes, occasionally helping the worthy seeker if, they can't avoid it. And so I had these three very different characters. My personal favorite was the one in Wickedly Dangerous, which was the first book in the series, Barbara, because she's sort of cranky and, is constantly like threatening to like turn people into toads. So I got to channel my inner cranky through her.
Was
and
that difficult to do?
Not at all. No, easy as pie. The next one, Becca, who was younger and a surfer girl who lived by the ocean, she was a little trickier because she was sweet. And I'm like, oh,
Well,
I guess I've got some inner sweet I can
the
channel.
character.
But she was also a hippie, so I could channel my inner hippie.
Okay. Uh-huh.
And they all traveled with a dragon, because in the stories there was a Chudo Yudo, which was a dragon that was associated with the Baba Yaga. But of course, people would notice a dragon too. So each of these women has her own companion Chudo Yudo. Barbara's is actually named Chudo Yudo, and he is disguised as a giant white pit bull. And then the second one is disguised as a giant black Newfoundland because it's by the water. And then, of course, all my readers are like, but you're a cat lady. Why isn't there a cat one? So the third one is a giant Norwegian forest cat named Koshka. And Koshka is sort of a joke because Koshka is, first of all, he's a dragon. He's not really a cat. And Koshka means cat. And it also is the female form. And he was a boy cat. So he was like a little crabby about his name. And I now have a cat who is either part Norwegian forest cat or part Maine Coon cat. He's very fluffy, probably Maine Coon cat. And his name is Koshka, which is like a third level joke. Only people who have read the books understand it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so once I got the idea for that first book, I had a starting place for the second book. And what I did, each of these books, they're paranormal romance. So in romance, basically, you have a happily ever after, which is one of the things I loved about these books. Each of these women got to find her true love and get her happily ever after. But the series got to continue because there were more characters that you could follow.
Right.
Although I was really mean, and in the seventh book, I took away Barbara's happily ever after, and she had to go get it back again.
Well,
yeah, authors, they're so mean.
God, how could you do that to her? God.
Well, I just came to me. I was like, well, how can I write another book when she's already found, her true love? I'm like, well, I could take them away. Shoot, that's mean. And then I wrote that book. And because I knew I was going to be doing a continuing series, by the time I wound up one book, I would always try and know where the next book was going in general so that I could have a hint at the end that led to the next book. So hopefully people would want to run out and buy it as soon as it came out.
Absolutely, because that's what you want as an author. And I like your coffee cup there. People can't see it.
Oh, yeah. It's because I just recently I took part in their Llewellyn Con online convention, and I taught a class for them. And all of the people who did that got this beautiful cup that says Llewellyn, has their little symbol of the crescent moon. And it's one of those sort of insulated ones. It's lovely. And it's really nice for doing this kind of thing because I don't have to worry about accidentally knocking it over while I'm talking to you, which is likely to happen.
My son-in-law gave me that.
You say which like it's a bad thing. I always love those ones. I have a T-shirt that says that. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a birthday present last year. Well, we are coming to the end of our hour already, which is just blowing my mind because I'm loving talking with you. So I may have to have you back on to talk a little bit more.
I will happily come back in January of 2025, which seems like a really long time away, but it's like 6 months now. I have another book coming out called A Year and a Day of Everyday Magic. That's a 365 book. I did A Year and a Day of Everyday Witchcraft. I think that came out in like 2017 or 2019. And people have been asking me to do another one because they, bless their hearts, use it year after year after year, but you don't want to read the same thing year after year after year. So I did do another one, and that'll be coming out in January. And, we could definitely, I could come back and talk about that, or we could just talk about the fiction. We can talk about anything you want.
I would love to talk with you more about how you develop your spellcraft and kind of get into the nugget of that. So we'll have to communicate and come up with.
Absolutely.
Is there any place that you're going to be or anything else coming up that you want to talk about?
I don't know. I'm not going to any conferences or conventions this year. And I did last fall, I gave an online tarot class, which people really loved, and they've been asking me to do another one. And the friend who helped me do like the behind the scenes stuff, like setting up the sign up and things, which I'm not really technically savvy enough to do, is busy doing something else. So if I can find somebody else who knows how to do that stuff, I actually have a few online classes that I would really like to do. And if you follow me on the interwebs, which of course everybody's going to do that,
And I'll put
I
something in
will,
the description.
yes, I will, if I, manage to pull that off, I will be talking about it everywhere. I mean, if people are looking for me, first of all, I do have a newsletter, which only goes out once a month. And if you go to my website, which is deborahblakeauthor.com, very, very imaginative. But if you go to deborahblakeauthor.com, you can find links to sign up to for the newsletter. You can find links for my Facebook and my Instagram and my TikTok, which I'm still trying to figure out. I really, honest to goodness, I
I
just
figured out one
and
minute of it.
and and my Twitter or whatever we're calling it this week. I also have a Patreon, and my patrons often get little extra things. They see things that, other people don't see, or they see it first. They get like the cover reveals first, that kind of stuff. They get to see like behind the scenes glimpses of, they got sneak peeks of the Witch's Familiar Oracle for a whole year before anybody else saw them. So yeah, if you like that kind of thing, there's also levels starting like at $1. There are also people who can get a tarot reading every single month, depending on, if they want to do. And there's also a link on my website if you want a tarot reading for me. I do them. So yeah, that's probably the easiest thing.
And so I'll make sure to include that link in the description for anybody that wants to go in and see that. So I
But
appreciate you coming on and talking with me. It's been a pleasure. And
it has. I've had a great time. I will
on here again.
happily come back anytime.
Yeah, I'm sorry about the interruption too. So I'll have you back on. So thank you very much.